You're listening to Chesterton Radio, broadcasting from the little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas. Stories, ideas, wonder. And now, from the common room.
So, I want you to paint this picture in your mind.
Okay.
The year is 1989. And we are watching The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson.
Oh, yeah, I love those old episodes.
Right. So sitting next to Johnny is a 93-year-old George Bruns. And he is just puffing away on what he proudly announces is his 10th or maybe 11th cigar of the day.
That is so on brand for him.
Totally. And Carson asks him about the legendary entertainers he's known, over the whole century.
Because, Burns shared the stage with literally everyone from, the gritty days of vaudeville all the way to modern television.
Exactly. But Burns, he doesn't even blink. He delivers this definitive zero-hesitation verdict on one specific man.
Al Jolson.
Al Jolson. Burns looks right at Carson and says that Jolson might not have been the greatest talent. But he was, without question, the greatest entertainer in the world.
Which is a really interesting distinction to make.
It is. And figuring out how a performer commanded that kind of gravity, that kind of mythical dominance over an audience, well, that's our mission today. Here on this custom deep dive for the Common Room on the little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas, on Chesterton Radio.
I'm really excited for this one. Because that distinction Burns makes between talent and entertainer, it really sets the foundation for everything we have in our stack of sources today.
Yeah, he wasn't saying Jolson had, the most pristine vocal range.
Right, or that he was some elegantly trained dancer. He was talking about a gravitational pull. Just this absolute physical domination of the audience.
Which is hard to picture now.
It is, because the historical record on Jolson is incredibly layered. Right. We have these PBS biographical profiles, the discographies, and most importantly, eyewitness accounts.
Yeah, those eyewitness accounts are wild.
They consistently describe a performer who didn't just sing a song. He literally attacked the room.
And trying to understand Jolson's appeal today, just by listening to a scratchy century-old record, it's kind of like trying to understand a Category 5 hurricane by looking at a faded Polaroid.
That's a great way to put it.
Like, you can see the dark clouds and you see the shape of the storm, but you completely miss the overwhelming, terrifying physical force of the wind actually hitting your face.
You miss the electricity in the air entirely.
Exactly.
And the reason he had to hit audiences with that hurricane force, it actually goes all the way back to his childhood.
Oh, right.
Yeah, to understand the performer, we really have to trace where that desperate lifelong need for applause started. Because it didn't start under the bright lights of Broadway.
No, it definitely didn't. It started in trauma, displacement, and just a very specific kind of psychological void.
Right, so let's get into his background.
Yeah, so he wasn't born Al Jolson, the American icon. He was born Asa Jolson in Sredzius, Lithuania, sometime in the 1880s.
And he was the youngest of 4 kids, right?
Yeah, the youngest of 4. And the historical profiles specifically describe him as the baby of the family. He was deeply attached to his mother, Naomi, like a real mama's boy.
And his father was a rabbi and a cantor, which is actually a crucial detail.
It is, because cantors are essentially the vocal leaders of a synagogue.
Exactly. They have to project their voices to fill a large space. And they carry the emotional weight of a congregation without any amplification.
So no microphones.
No microphones at all, just pure acoustic power. And that booming, resonant vocal tradition is what Asa is absorbing from day one.
Wow, so it's just baked into his environment.
Totally. But then when Asa is about 8 years old, his father moves the family across the world to Washington, D.C.
And that massive geographic and cultural transition to America is immediately followed by a catastrophic emotional blow.
Right.
Because later that same year, his mother dies.
And the PBS historical profile notes this devastating detail. The 8-year-old Asa actually witnessed his mother in her death throes.
Oh, man.
Yeah, the trauma of that event just broke something in him. He became entirely withdrawn.
He was just a kid.
Exactly. For 7 months, he essentially stopped speaking. He stopped engaging with the world entirely.
That is just heartbreaking. But then, out of nowhere, he meets a street performer, a banjo player named Al Reeves.
And it's just like a switch flips in his brain. The silence breaks.
Yeah, by age 11, little Asa has changed his name to Al. And he yells out on the streets of Washington, D.C., singing for nickels and dimes just to buy tickets to the National Theater.
He was just consumed by it.
He's so consumed that he literally runs away from home. He joins a circus and eventually hits the grueling vaudeville circuit with his older brother, Harry.
Well, psychology here is just a textbook case of substitution.
How so?
You have a child who suffers an agonizing premature loss of his mother's unconditional love. How does a child process an unfillable void like that?
Right? I mean, they can't.
Exactly. So for Jolson, he sought to replace the intimate love of one person with the roaring, unconditional adoration of a theater audience.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just a career choice for him.
Not at all. It became a lifelong, almost pathological drive. The applause wasn't a metric of professional success for him. It was emotional oxygen.
Without it, he couldn't breathe.
Literally.
But that vulnerability, I mean, it didn't make him humble.
Oh, definitely not.
It didn't make him a fragile, sensitive artist hiding in the wings. That desperate need for love mutated into a monstrous, world-consuming ego.
A massive ego.
He couldn't just be an act on the bill. He had to be the only act that mattered.
Which brings up that incredible story George Burns tells about sharing the vaudeville bill with Jolson early on.
Oh, the sink story.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So when Jolson was in his dressing room waiting to go on, he would leave the water running in the sink full blast.
And you think that was just for white noise, right? To calm his nerves or warm up his vocal cords or something?
Not at all.
No.
He left the water running specifically so he wouldn't have to hear the audience laughing or applauding for the other acts out on the stage.
The idea that the audience was directing their love, their attention, their applause at anyone else was literal physical pain to him.
That is wild.
He couldn't stomach the acoustics of someone else's success. It felt like a threat to his very survival.
But Burns, being the sharp operator he was, he knew exactly how to play this ego to his advantage.
He really did.
The sources outline this fantastic dynamic between them. So Burns loved sturgeon, the fish.
Right.
Which was apparently very hard to get in California at the time. But Jolson had it imported directly from New York.
Of course he did.
So Burns figured out a brilliant system. He would go into Jolson's dressing room every single day and just relentlessly compliment him.
Just buttering him up.
Oh, totally. He'd spend 10 minutes telling Jolson what a staggering, unparalleled genius he was.
And in return, Jolson would feed him the imported New York sturgeon.
Yeah. And as Burns joked years later, he said, "I like the sturgeon better than I like Jolson."
That is hilarious, but it perfectly highlights the transaction at the core of Jolson's personality. You give me absolute undivided adoration, and I will reward you.
I will let you into my orbit.
Exactly. And his relentless ego drove him to dominate the vaudeville circuit. He would routinely break the rules. He'd completely take over shows, going over his allotted time because he refused to leave the stage if the crowd was still cheering.
Right, but vaudeville was a shared stage, and Jolson wanted to own the whole theater.
He did. But to conquer Broadway, he needed a signature hook. He needed something visually arresting, a theatrical device that separated him from every other guy in a suit singing a song.
Which leads to a really complicated part of his legacy.
Right.
Because in 1904, he takes the advice of a performer named James Dooley, and he finds that visual hook.
He begins performing his act in blackface.
Yeah, he starts billing himself as the blackface with the grand opera voice.
And it is a specific persona that catapults him to becoming the biggest star on Broadway in the 1910s and 20s. He anchored massive hit shows like Sinbad and Bombo.
Look, when we look at the sources, we hit this massive, unavoidable wall. He became the biggest star on Broadway by performing in blackface.
Which today is universally understood as a deeply racist and oppressive caricature.
Completely. It is inherently tied to the mockery, degradation, and systemic oppression of African Americans during the Jim Crow era.
And our sources don't shy away from this. In the PBS Forum comments provided in our materials, we see modern outrage clearly and understandably reflected.
Right. Many viewers argued that Jolson's legacy is inextricably linked to the persecution of Black Americans.
Yeah, they note that you simply cannot separate the theatrical makeup from the horrific racial violence of the era in which he was performing.
But the historical sources also present a deeply complex duality regarding Jolson's specific use of it. We have to report on what they say.
Exactly. The PBS biography points out that as a marginalized first-generation Jewish immigrant, Jolson used blackface as a literal and psychological mask.
Yeah, the argument is that putting on the burnt cork somehow untethered him from his own trauma. His own identity as Asa Jolson, the grieving immigrant kid.
It provided a barrier between himself and the audience that ironically allowed him to express uninhibited raw emotion on stage.
And layered on top of that psychological mask is this profound musical paradox that the sources discuss.
Right, because while utilizing a visually degrading tradition, Jolson was simultaneously acting as a massive champion for African-American musical innovations.
Which is such a contradiction.
It really is. In 1905, he heard black music, early jazz, and blues in New Orleans, and it completely rewired his brain.
He didn't invent minstrelsy.
Yeah.
But he took his massive, untouchable platform and used it to passionately introduce jazz, blues, and ragtime to mainstream, highly segregated white audiences.
Audiences who would have never otherwise heard those rhythms in a Broadway theater.
And the way he physically delivered that music was a total shock to the system.
Right. The historian Stephen Hannon, who is quoted in the PBS material, he makes a really striking comparison.
I love this part.
He argues that Al Jolson was essentially the Elvis Presley of his day.
Which sounds crazy until you hear the detail.
Exactly. Decades before rock and roll, decades before Elvis went on the Ed Sullivan Show and scandalized the nation, Jolson was utilizing these below-the-waist gyrations.
Right, falling to one knee, sliding across the stage.
And leaning into funky, syncopated rhythms. White audiences had simply never seen a white performer move like that.
Because the prevailing style of the 1910s was stiff. It was formal, standing rigidly by the piano.
Jolson was just a kinetic explosion.
And the sources explicitly state that by pushing this music into the mainstream, Jolson helped pave the way for the broad acceptance of African-American giants like Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and Fats Waller.
So you are left with this incredibly tangled reality.
Yeah, a performer who utilized an oppressive, racist visual caricature to deliver a genuine musical revolution that helped break down massive cultural barriers.
It is the absolute definition of a historical contradiction, and it really explains why his legacy resists neat categorization today.
It does. But if we pull back from the controversy for a moment and return to the mechanics of his live performance, the way he controlled a room was just unprecedented. To illustrate what it meant to actually be in the theater when Jolson attacked an audience, we have to look at another eyewitness account from George Burns.
The Denver story.
Yes, the Denver story. It's probably the most vivid example of his sheer stamina and ego.
Set this up for us.
Okay, so the 1920s. Burns and Gracie Allen are a small-time act at this point, and they managed to get tickets to see Jolson's hit show Bombo, which was touring through Denver.
But the environmental conditions that night are terrible.
Right, there's a massive blinding snowstorm blanketing the city.
Burns and Gracie literally rush to the theater through the snow. They don't even take off their own stage makeup from their vaudeville gig because they don't want to miss a single second.
So they sit down. It's 9 p.m., no Jolson.
The crowd is waiting.
It's 9:30 p.m., still no Jolson.
Oh, man.
Finally, at 9:45, the audience starts buzzing. And Jolson walks straight out onto the stage, entirely covered in snow.
He hasn't even been backstage to the dressing room yet.
No, he just walked off the street, through the wings, and right into the spotlight.
Think about the protocol of theater here. Any other performer would cancel the show.
Or at the very least, beg the audience's pardon. Retreat to the dressing room for an hour to prepare, and just hope the crowd didn't riot.
Not Jolson.
Nope. He looks out at this freezing, annoyed crowd and says, "I'm sorry, I was at somebody's house for dinner and I got carried away. Do you mind if I put my makeup on right here?"
Which is insane.
He proceeds to strip down right there on the stage. He sets up a mirror and puts on his stage makeup in front of the audience, firing off jokes and completely charming them while he does it.
He turns his tardiness into an intimate behind-the-scenes event.
Yeah, and then the play Bombo actually starts.
Finally.
Right? But about 10 minutes into the plot, Jolson gets bored.
Of course he does.
He stops the whole production. He literally breaks character, looks at the audience, and says, "Do you know the story?
Yeah.
The horse wins the race, the fella gets the girl, you want that, or do you want me to entertain you?"
Which is an astonishing level of arrogance.
It really is.
He is dismissing the entire cast, the playwright, the director, the set designers. He's telling the audience that the multi-million-dollar Broadway production they paid to see is just filler holding him back.
And the audience, because they are completely under his spell, they scream for him to entertain them.
So what does he do?
Jolson then calls the rest of the cast out to the stage. He looks at the chorus girls and asks, "You got dates tonight?" A few of them nod yes. He says, "Go ahead, leave."
Oh my gosh.
He tells the rest of the cast to just sit down on the floor of the stage. He tells the orchestra to just follow his lead.
Wow.
And then he performs a solo improvised concert from 10 p.m. until 1 in the morning.
3 straight hours.
3 straight hours of singing, sweating, dropping to his knees, telling stories.
And he's not even done after that.
No. When he is finally done, When he has wrung every drop of applause out of the room, he tells the exhausted but elated crowd, I'm going to take off my makeup, I'm going to the restaurant next door where there's a piano, I'll meet you there and sing a few more songs.
It perfectly encapsulates George Burns's verdict. That is not just talent. Talent is hitting the right notes.
Right.
That is dictatorial psychological control over thousands of people. He owned the physical space of that theater.
He dictated the terms of reality in that room.
But his next career move would fundamentally alter the trajectory of global entertainment.
Yeah.
And ironically, it would remove him from the physical room entirely.
Right. We're talking about the advent of sound in film.
Big turning point.
Huge. So in 1927, Jolson stars in The Jazz Singer.
And the plot of this movie is essentially a direct mirror of his own life, isn't it?
Very much so. The character Jackie Rabinowitz is a cantor's son, torn between the solemn religious traditions of his father and the secular, magnetic, undeniable pull of show business.
The technical mechanics of The Jazz Singer are fascinating, too, because it wasn't a fully talking picture in the way we understand them today.
Right. It's not like the dialogue was fully integrated.
No, the movie mostly utilizes the old silent film technology with title cards for dialogue, but it features 4 dramatically innovative sequences using the Vitaphone sound-on-disc system.
And explain how that worked, because it's pretty fragile, right?
Very fragile. It involved playing a massive wax phonograph record that had to be perfectly synchronized with the film projector.
So if a needle skipped, the whole movie's out of sync.
Exactly. It was incredibly prone to failure. But when it worked, it was magic.
And when audiences heard Jolson actually sing and speak a few lines of dialogue from the screen, it was an absolute sensation.
It effectively ended the silent film era almost overnight. And it made Jolson the first modern multimedia movie star.
He followed it up a year later in 1928 with a movie called The Singing Fool.
Which became massive.
Oh, it was the highest-grossing film in history. It held that box office record for over a decade, until Gone with the Wind finally dethroned it in 1939.
And it's a rise in The Jazz Singer that he utters that famous immortal touch phrase.
You ain't heard nothing yet.
Exactly. But looking through the historical notes, it turns out this phrase didn't originate in a Hollywood script meeting.
No screenwriter typed that up.
No, it originated in his live bravado years earlier on the stage.
And George Burns was there to witness the birth of it, too.
Of course he was.
So it was during World War I, at a Liberty Bond rally at the Medway Theater in Columbus Circle in New York.
And the lineup for this rally is insane.
It really is. You have the absolute titans of the era. Sam Bernard is there. George M. Cohan is there, singing over there for the very first time in public.
Wow.
And then the great Italian operatic tenor Enrico Caruso steps out and sings Pagliacci.
Think about the sheer acoustic power of Enrico Caruso singing Pagliacci at the absolute zenith of his career, in a theater packed with patriotic fervor.
The applause must have been deafening.
The acoustic energy in the room would have been intimidating to anyone. Any other performer on Earth would have hidden in the wings and waited 10 minutes for the crowd to calm down before daring to follow him.
But out walks Jolson. He's wearing a sharp blue suit, blue shirt, deeply tanned from a recent trip to Florida.
And he walks right into the teeth of that lingering, thunderous applause for Caruso, completely unfazed.
He walks to the edge of the stage, ribs open his collar, looks fiercely at the crowd and shouts over the noise, "You ain't heard nothing yet."
And according to Burns, he absolutely rioted the crowd.
It's the ultimate theatrical flex.
It really is. He essentially told a theater full of people that the greatest operatic tenor on earth, a man with unparalleled vocal majesty, was just his warm-up act.
And he delivered on the promise.
Yeah, he did.
But wait, I'm getting stuck on a contradiction here, looking at how his career arcs.
What do you mean?
Well, if his entire superpower, his absolute genius, was manipulating a live, breathing room of people, stopping plays, reading the temperature of a crowd,
Yeah.
wasn't making movies the worst possible career move in the long run.
That is an excellent point.
Because you can't read the room if you're trapped on a piece of celluloid. It's like listening to a live comedy album where the comedian is working the crowd. You know it's funny, but you don't feel the electric tension of actually sitting in the front row.
It is the ultimate paradox of his career. Film immortalized him, but it also neutralized his primary weapon.
Film is rigid.
It was locked in amber. Jolson couldn't adjust his performance on a movie screen based on the reaction of a theater in Ohio or a matinee in London.
Right.
Furthermore, because film distributed his act to millions of people simultaneously, the novelty of his explosive style wore off much faster.
That makes sense.
By the early 1930s, that rigidness combined with rapidly shifting technologies caught up with him.
The technology of the microphone fundamentally changed what audiences wanted to hear.
It changed everything.
Suddenly you have the rise of the radio microphone, which doesn't require a singer to project to the back row of a 2,000-seat theater.
It allows for intimate, soft-spoken crooners like Bing Crosby and Rudy Vallee to emerge.
Right next to Crosby's effortless, casual conversational style, Jolson's grand, bombastic, chest-thumping delivery suddenly seemed wildly outdated.
He was practically shouting while Crosby was whispering directly into your ear.
The acoustic shift just left him stranded.
The sources document a steep decline in the 1930s. His films from that era, like Say It with Songs and Mammy, failed to capture the public's imagination.
He even stops making records for a while.
Yeah, he's relegated to a kind of semi-retirement, taking supporting roles where he is essentially hired to play nostalgic, over-the-top caricatures of his former self.
But then World War II breaks out.
Right.
And this chapter of Jolson's life completely reframes how I view his ego and his need for an audience.
Because he's in his late 50s at this point.
He's a millionaire. He doesn't have to do anything. He could sit by a pool in California for the rest of his life.
But instead, he tirelessly travels the globe to entertain American troops.
And we aren't just talking about playing safe, well-lit USO bases in London or Hawaii.
No, he demands to go to the front lines.
He goes to Alaska, the South Pacific, North Africa, Italy. He plays in knee-deep mud, in sweltering tin huts, dangerously close to active combat zones.
His dedication to the troops was absolute, and the physical toll it extracted from him was massive.
I mean, he pushed himself so relentlessly, performing multiple shows a day in horrific conditions.
Right, he contracted severe cases of malaria and pneumonia. It got so bad that in early 1945, he had to undergo major surgery to have a portion of his left lung removed.
Losing part of your lung, for a singer whose entire brand, whose entire identity is built on massive, overpowering acoustic vocal projection.
That should have been a career-ending death sentence.
And physically, it did change him. The surgery drops his famous soaring tenor voice into a much lower, huskier bass register.
It should have been the end, but the acoustic change actually sets the stage for one of the most unprecedented, miraculous comebacks in the history of show business.
Wait, really?
Because his voice dropped into that huskier register, it suddenly sounded a bit more modern.
Oh, I see.
It sounded more suited to the era of microphones and crooners.
So it wasn't as grating or shouty.
Exactly. And then in 1946, Columbia Pictures decides to make a biographical film about his life called The Jolson Story.
The mechanics of how they made this movie are so wonderfully bizarre.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So Jolson is alive, well, and fiercely protective of his legacy.
Of course.
But Columbia hires a young, handsome actor named Larry Parks to play Jolson on screen.
But Parks doesn't sing a note, though.
Nope. He just lip-syncs meticulously to the tracks. Jolson himself dubs all the singing for the movie.
The psychological weirdness of Jolson watching a younger, better-looking man receive standing ovations on screen while pantomiming to his voice must have been intense.
Seriously. But the result was a colossal, unimaginable hit.
The Jolson Story became one of the top 10 grossing films in history up to that time.
And the soundtrack album, featuring Jolson's re-recorded hits with his new, deeper, richer voice, it spent an astonishing 25 weeks at #1 on the Billboard charts.
So suddenly, pushing 60 years old with one lung, he is back on top of the world.
He's hosting the Craft Music Hall on the radio, pulling in massive ratings.
He has a whole new generation of screaming Bobby Soxers treating him like a contemporary pop idol.
And of course, his old friend George Burns couldn't resist needling him about the bizarre reality of his comeback.
Burns knew exactly which buttons to push. He understood that Jolson's ego was thrilled by the success, but deeply wounded by the fact that he wasn't physically on the screen.
Right, so Burns goes to visit Jolson after the movie becomes a runaway hit, and Burns says, "Jolie, the soundtrack is the greatest track, the greatest."
He just keeps relentlessly complimenting the audio engineering, the music, the vinyl record.
Finally, Jolson, getting increasingly agitated, says, "George, I might have to stop giving you sturgeon."
Oh, man.
And Burns replies, "Well, Jolie, I didn't see the picture."
Oh, that's brilliant.
He completely dismissed the visual component of Larry Parks, confirming Jolson's deepest insecurity. That the movie was a hit because of the voice, but the audience was falling in love with another man's face.
Even in the midst of a massive historic comeback, that compulsive need to be the only one in the spotlight, to be the physical center of attention in the room, it never left him.
Never. The comeback allowed him to go out on his own terms. There was even a highly successful sequel made, Jolson Sings Again, in 1949.
But resting on his laurels was psychologically impossible for him.
It truly was. In September 1950, at his own expense, Jolson travels to Korea to entertain the troops fighting in the Korean War.
And he refuses to take it easy.
He does 42 shows in 16 days.
The physical exertion on a man in his mid-60s operating with one lung in a war zone is catastrophic.
He returns to the U.S. completely exhausted, physically broken, and dies of a massive heart attack in San Francisco shortly after, on October 23, 1950.
He essentially gave his life for the applause and for the troops. It was a profound, deeply tragic, and yet somehow perfectly fitting end for a man who lived entirely for the audience.
Yeah, it really is.
But to truly cement his sheer gravitational pull, his absolute psychological need to dominate the environment he was in, I want to recall one final anecdote from George Burns.
The Hillcrest Country Club story. It's the ultimate distillation of his ego.
It really is. This happened in Jolson's later years, during that period when he wasn't performing as much, but still possessed all the wealth and status in the world.
Right.
The country club in Los Angeles is having an anniversary show. The lineup is a staggering who's who of comedy legends. You have Jack Benny, Danny Thomas, Danny Kaye, and George Burns.
So heavy hitters.
Heavy hitters. They all go out one by one. They all kill. They leave the crowd roaring with laughter.
And Jolson is scheduled to close the show. He is the grand finale.
So the announcer steps to the microphone and says, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, Al Jolson."
But Jolson refuses to just walk on stage.
He knows the audience has just spent 2 hours laughing, applauding, and giving their affection to 4 other men.
Right.
He cannot abide that lingering energy. So he hires 8 violinists out of his own pocket.
8 of them.
8. Before he even steps into the light, the 8 violinists walk out onto the stage and spend several agonizing minutes just tuning up.
Like just making noise.
Yes. Plucking strings, bowing randomly, making this chaotic noise, making the audience wait and squirm.
So he's effectively acting as a palate cleanser. He's intentionally creating dead air to wipe their hard drives.
He intentionally reset the tension in the room. He wiped the audience's acoustic and emotional memory of every comedian that came before him.
Wow.
And only then, when the room was entirely his to claim, did he walk out and sing. As Burns noted, when Jolson was finished, you forgot anyone else had ever been on that stage that night.
He had to be the absolute center of the universe.
Always.
So we arrive back to the central question of this deep dive. George Burns insisted that Al Jolson was the greatest entertainer of his generation.
And looking at the entirety of these sources, his legacy remains incredibly tangled.
Yeah, you have a trailblazing musical synthesis that forced jazz and blues into the mainstream consciousness.
You have the deeply offensive, racist, theatrical device of blackface that can never and should never be sanitized.
You have a monumental, all-consuming ego.
And you have an unparalleled, almost terrifying stage presence fueled by a childhood tragedy.
It leaves us with a profound question about how we remember performers whose true genius was fundamentally tied to the physical space they occupy.
Which brings us back to your earlier point about the cage of film and recording.
Right. If a performer's brilliance lies entirely in the ephemeral, unrepeatable magnetic connection they forge with a live audience in a specific room.
Feeling the temperature of the crowd, adjusting to the mood, dominating the psychology of thousands of people in real time.
Does recording technology ultimately do them a disservice?
That is the question.
Was Al Jolson really the greatest entertainer of his generation? And by preserving only a flat, two-dimensional record of him, the scratchy vinyl, the black and white films, have we ironically lost the very thing that made him a legend?
Have we lost the feeling of simply being in the room with the hurricane?
And in forgetting why audiences thought he was the greatest, have we lost something essential about the nature of live entertainment itself?
It's something to think about next time you listen to a recording from a century ago, trying to hear the magic through the static.
Thanks for joining us in the Common Room.